So here's my summary for week one. Um, what I learned about downloading the ISO and DMG files, like I said before, I have really installed a lot of different OSs on different machines. At one point, I had a laptop that had Windows 7, Windows 8, and Mac OS on it. So I really didn't learn anything different as far as how to download and install an operating system. And the DMG files, I had a class in a different degree study program that I end up downloading a lot of the DMG files beforehand. So that is why I always already had VMware installed and had a Windows 10 set up. Only thing I did have to do was change a couple of the isolation settings because of the class that I was in before. We had to have it a different way. So inside of here, I I basically had to change the settings for the isolation because before we had to have enable drag and drop and enable copy and paste. So I had to change those settings to pure isolation. And we also had 4 processor cores, and I had to change it down to 2, but everything else stayed exactly the same. So I really didn't learn much more than I already knew about it, as I already did it before, and along with me having to research and find some stuff out by myself just to set things up the way that I wanted them set up for this. Um, like I said, I showed you how I edited the hardware settings, so that's nothing really different about um anything that I learned from this particular lesson. As far as the Windows Server, the settings I had edited in here were also the the isolation settings. I thought I unchecked those, but I'll fix that in a minute. And then the display settings, I had to change that so it looks good on this screen because I have the Retina MacBook Pro. And then the um, along with the disk drive and the disk size and stuff like that. So what I learned about kernels this week was, again, I have been dwelling into like certain development programs for a while. So along with Android has its own built-in kernel, and if you want to make a custom ROM, you had to get the kernel root files from the manufacturer. So if you needed to edit a kernel on a Samsung phone, you had to find the kernel files in the dev kit or the repository. So me knowing that, I knew what a kernel was beforehand. I did know there were different ones, being the multi-function or the hyperkernel, which is the microkernel and the monokernel put, or the multi-kernel and the microkernel put into one. I didn't know there was a difference because I just thought all kernels were the same, considering how Android is built off the monokernel because of the hardware limitations. They It needs to just have one quick succession in and out as far as what needs to be ran on top of the Android OS. So a virtual machine is a machine that is used to run a it is a program that is used to run a full on different operating system on top of on top of a already running program without needing new hardware to do it. They 4 commonalities in an operating system is, one is the internet programs that is used to hop on the internet is a generally common thing. All of them have their own specific ones that they have as set default. For instance, Mac OS has Safari set a default. Google OS has Chrome set a default, and Windows has Microsoft Edge. The other one is the network availability, and the network settings are generally all the same because you really can't have a difference in how you connect to the internet. Just going into the overall settings can be different because they have different universal settings that can be set up. The other one is the installation of the files, installation of the OS. are around generally the same. They all use either an ISO file or a disk that you either download or you install into the system and go through the setup motions and that sort of thing. Along with the task manager and the process viewer, they might have a different way of using it and have a different way of showing it off, but it basically comes down to the same aspect of it shows the processes as they are needed. And the final one I would say is the programs that are installed from the original install. For instance, all of the OSs install a browser, install a file explorer, install the task manager, and they all install a certain kind of kernel depending on the system, but they all install a certain kernel to be ran on the system. Already touched on the 3 kernel types. The difference is the multitasking, the mono kernel just runs one instance at a time, and it's more efficient because it doesn't have to bounce around, but it also has a drawback that anything needs to be done, it has to be completely rewritten. The hyperkernel is a multitasking kernel. It's what the Windows program runs off of. It can do multitasking on a bunch of different things at the same time because it allocates certain programs to a certain amount of memory. And as a program's needed to, it can bounce from that program to the other one without having to open or close the other one out. And the microkernel is a smaller kernel it's more of a modular kernel that can be written and taken apart and rewritten anytime it needs to, depending on the situation and what needs to be put in there for it. Processes are what the system uses to show. The processes of what a system is, and as for this sake, the kernel process or QuickTime Player is what I'm using right now, is what's running, and it pulling more the energy impact is how much battery it is. It's not using the high performance GPU. And then like Microsoft Word, which is running in the background, it's not taking much battery, but it's running. And again, no GPU usage. And then the VMware Fusion, it's just the different programs that's running on top of the system at all times. The file systems, ext4 and file systems are basically just what the programs are used to run and how they are read and the amount of information that can be stored in said program. It can go from a basic one to a more universal one. FAT32 is the most universal one, but NTFS is also one that's usually used on external hard drives and can be carried from system to system. As I have a USB device or a USB or external hard drive for my computers that I also use on my Xbox to play movies off of. The 4 hardware components is the display, the CPU, the GPU, and the memory modules. And the display is obviously what you see. It's what shows everything that's done. The CPU is the brains of necessity, the brains of the system. It tells it what to do. In my opinion, the GPU would be the heart, as it performs the more extreme tasks to have a better display of rendering images. And I would say the muscle is the RAM, because it controls the more RAM you have, the better you can process and do multitasking on the system. And roles and additions on the Windows server has the importance of them is whatever you decide you want to use a role for, you can set a role to manage all of the faxes that come through a network or all the emails that get sent in and out, or you control what printers go to what with the with roles. And the different editions of Windows Server also comes back to what it's used for. You have the more enterprise edition, which can handle heavier hardware, as in Xeon processors or dual or up to four processors or up to 4 terabytes of memory. And then the one that we're using right now can handle higher hardware, but nothing close to that. As far as the ISO files that I have, the Ubuntu is here, the Windows Server, and the CentOS. They're all here along with the VMwares in my folder that I labeled school that you can barely see. And then the virtual machines are placed here inside of my documents folder. I don't have the Windows 10 ISO because, oh, never mind. It's right here. It's the one I downloaded back when I was in the programming class. So as far as this week, I learned a few things, but not as much as more of a review for stuff I know, just for me being into computers as long as I have. But am looking forward to learning more and potentially getting better at what I already know. Well, not potentially. I'm going to get better than what I already know. So, yeah. So, looking forward to this class and seeing where it leads me. Thank you.